I'm just going to, for like 2 minutes, I just want to touch on something. Because what happens is I come and I do these seminars, and people go, wow, now I'm extremely depressed, and I don't know what to do, and I'm very anxious. And then people say, well, should we be preparing? If we're actually going to live through these things, should we be preparing? And my response to that is that I believe that the Old Testament gives us examples that were intended for us. And I think even as Joseph, for instance, saw the 7 lean years, and prepared for 7 lean years, and then as a result of having those silos filled, he was able to essentially become one of the biggest serfs in world history, and he owned much of the land because people sold their land for food. Not that we want to become serfs, but I do believe that physical preparation is a wise thing. I do believe that that's important. However, that said, it's very easy to become anxious and over-obsessed with preparing physically. I think that physical preparation is a wise thing, whether the end times come or not. I think that it's wise to get back to some of the things that people all used to understand. I mean, you know, I saw a TV show the other day where sitcom where the cable had gone out, and the gal on the show says, oh my gosh, what did people do in the olden days before they had cable? She said, I think I'm going to throw up. And, you know, it's nice to be able to know how to do things like bake bread and garden, you know, basic fundamental life things. And it's also good to have, I believe, some long-term food storage in the basement. If you got little kids, you can feed your family for 6 months. Maybe, you know, you're out of a job, whatever. It's nice to have a wood-burning stove to know that, you know, if there's a storm, you don't have to go to a hotel for 2 weeks or whatever. And all those things are very good and wise. And not only that, not about protecting ourselves, but folks, if there's crisis, it's good to be, as a Christian, to say, you know something, to your neighbors, hey, here's a bag of rice. You know, you guys are taking care of, here's some stuff, I can help you out. And that's an opportunity. We need to view this as an opportunity that if we are prepared, we can minister to our neighbors. And so, you know, I believe that it's wisdom to form communities and to begin moving toward preparing for all these things. However, that said, you know, again, my head is in this stuff all the time. I get emails every day about how every expert out there says that this economic crisis in the United States is just beginning, and we haven't even begun to see the worst yet, and so forth. So it's easy for me to emotionally get caught up in all of it. And I find myself sometimes getting anxious. And the one verse that I just want to leave you all with is, just real briefly, in Luke 10:38, and that's the story of Mary and Martha, and most of you are familiar with it. Now, as they were traveling along, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister called Mary, who was seated at the Lord's feet listening to his word. But Martha was distracted with all of her preparations. See, I believe preparing for the end times is wise. I believe it's wisdom. Martha, however, was distracted by all of the preparations, okay? And she came to him, and she's all upset. Lord, don't you care that my sister is doing nothing? She's not helping me. I'm serving you all by myself. Tell her to help me. But the Lord answered her, and he said, Martha, Martha, you are worried and bothered about so many things. Preparation is good. Anxiety and fear is of the devil. Anxiety and fear is not what the Lord wants us to. He wants us to completely reject it, okay? We have to reject anxiety and fear and so forth. And then he makes this important point. Is preparation important? Was it good that Martha prepared for her guest, Jesus? Yes, absolutely. Jesus said, but only one thing, ultimately, only one thing is truly necessary, okay? Mary has chosen that. She has chosen the good thing. What did she do? She sat at the feet of Jesus and listened to his words. So I believe physical preparation, yes, it is important. We want to be the wise virgins and not the foolish virgins. Amen? Every year I go to Daddy's Day. I have a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 4-year-old. Now the 4-year-old is just getting out of her last year of preschool. But over the years, I've gone to Daddy's Day at the preschool each year. And They always remind us that the kids all have this little thing, I love my daddy because, and so like all the kids read it out and every dad just sits there sweating. Like, oh no, what's she going to say? And like the little girl's like, I love my daddy because she plays baseball. And he plays baseball and he does all this stuff. And then my kids are like, I love my daddy because he yells at me and spanks me when I need it. No. And I'm like, oh God, no. No, it's not that bad. But they always emphasize, they say, your children understand the word love. The way they spell love is T-I-M-E. Okay, and I'm always convicted every year. I'm like, oh gosh, I work too much, this and that. Spending time with Jesus, the foolish virgins versus the wise virgins. The wise virgins have the oil. What is the oil? It is T-I-M-E. It is deliberate, scheduled time sitting at the feet of Jesus. It is a secret history of devotional life, a life of prayer with the Holy Spirit, with Jesus in His Word. A specific, scheduled, consistent history with Jesus. That's what's going to get us through the end times. Food, all those things are good, okay? But those things are in the category of that which moth and rust can destroy, which thief can break in and steal. Jesus said to Martha, Mary has chosen that which is better, and what she has chosen will never be taken from her, okay? All those other things we can lose, we can eat, we can get stolen. Time with Jesus, a secret life in God, is something that will never be taken away from us, and that's what's going to get us through. That is what it's going to get us through. It's going to get some of us through in a valiant way, okay? That's what makes the difference between going through hard times, attainable, and sometimes even easy, versus impossible, okay? Do it. Spend time with Jesus. Make time. We're not going to get through without it. Okay, that's the last of my preaching, so amen. Does anyone have any questions? If not, I can start driving home early.
You mentioned in your book, Antichrist, that you felt that within 15 years the Islamic religion would surpass Christianity. I think you said about 15 years. And you also said that there was a great conversion from especially the churches in our inner cities, our blacks that were converting to Islam. Are you seeing that those numbers are ratcheting up as well as all these other events going at lickety-split paces as well?
I think what I said is that 15 years minimum, but reality I think it's more like 20, 25. Again, it's hard to know. The West is largely embracing a postmodern philosophy. Many people are referring to the West as a post-Christian, entering into a post-Christian age and so forth. Much of the percentage of the kids raised in the church are leaving the church. The West is not having as many kids. All those factors play in. And yes, Islam in the inner cities is continuing to explode. That's been taking place really for a few decades in the United States, and it's an incredibly tragic reality. It's interesting to note that of the percentage of the Protestant missionary force in the world, we have allotted this most insignificant percentage of our missionary force to the Muslim world, which is the largest unreached people group in the earth. And we've allotted the largest missionary force to the postmodern Westerners, which are those that have basically already been there, done that with regard to Christianity, and we're allotting the largest percentage to them. And they tend to have the greatest disregard for Christianity. There are Muslims coming to Christ all over the earth in an unprecedented way right now. And what's interesting to note in that is that one of the driving factors behind a commonality in many, many of these testimonies is that many of them have dreams and visions regarding a man in a robe with wounds in his hands and so forth that comes and tells them in a dream that he's Jesus and that he's God and so forth, and they come to Christ. So if you think about this, Jesus himself, unprecedented in history, is personally evangelizing Muslims. It's almost unbiblical. And that to me is a testament to the fact that God loves these people, or at least those among them that are seeking his face, those that are calling out to the unknown God, and they're praying 5 times a day, "Oh God, guide me to the straight path." He is responding to that call. And we're not sending enough missionaries, so he's filling in the slack. He's pulling in the slack, and that's an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing that we need to get behind. There are many in the media. There's a priest, or a Coptic Orthodox priest named Zechariah Boutros, who has a TV show in Arabic, and you'll cry watching the videos as these Muslims call in and convert to Christianity regularly on his show, because the intellectual bankruptcy of Islam is being exposed, and there's some fantastic things taking place in the Islamic world. However, again, there's not enough of us entering into that field, entering into the harvest field, and ultimately the demographics, the birth rates are completely overwhelming that. But we need to rejoice in that which is taking place, and it's ultimately still unavoidable that it's moving in that direction.
I have a question about the end of the 1,000 years. I was reading the other day where there is of course, another major battle that's going to come against Jesus Christ, and it mentions this is in Revelation 20 verses 7 and 8. It says, "And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the 4 quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea." And I was wondering what you had to say about the mention.
Thank you for that, because I actually meant to mention that. Gog and Magog is mentioned both in Ezekiel 38 and 39, but also it's mentioned there at the end of the millennium. And people go, "Well, wait a minute." Essentially what that is we have come to refer to the Antichrist. Always we just refer to him as the Antichrist. Well, again, biblically speaking, the primary name given to the Antichrist is Gog, Magog. The Jews often refer to the Antichrist as Gog, Magog. So much so that that's just sort of a general term. So there at the end of the millennium, when you have essentially Satan's man, Satan's army, Satan's final gathering, they just call it Gog, Magog. It's almost like saying the Antichrist armies gather again. It's not the same individual that is defeated prior to the return of Christ, or at the time of the return of Christ, prior to the millennium. It's more of just a general term referring to Satan and his armies that gather together once again. Efforts to try to take Ezekiel 38 and 39 and place it at the end of the millennium, which has been done by some, has even more significant errors than trying to place it before or at the very beginning of the tribulation. So the best way to understand that is that it's just a general reference to Satan and his armies once again, that is just sort of a common title that would be used to describe that.
You speak so much about the Antichrist. I would like to know what's the difference between the Antichrist and the false prophet.
Okay. Well, in Revelation 13, it describes the coming up out of the land of a beast, and he's called the false prophet. And then again, at the end of the Battle of Armageddon, when Jesus comes, it says he slays the Antichrist and the false prophet and all those that are with them. What theologians have understood that to mean, and which I agree with, is that the Antichrist will have an assistant. He will have someone that the Bible refers to as the false prophet, who will be the primary minister of propaganda, if you will. He will be sort of the religious sidekick of the Antichrist that will help to establish his authority. I believe it will be an individual. It's a little bit of a difficult concept, but in my book, Antichrist, I point out the fact that Islam's primary Messiah figure is the Mahdi. But they also do believe in the coming of Jesus Christ, whom they call Isa al-Masih. And according to Islam, Jesus, this Isa, comes back as the assistant to the Mahdi. Okay? He comes back as the assistant, and he tells the Christian world, I was never a Muslim. I was never a Christian. I never claimed to be the Son of God. I was a Muslim. Okay? This is your caliph. Follow him, referring to the Mahdi. So whether or not that will ever play out, I don't know. I don't ascribe any value to Islamic prophecy other than to show us what Muslims are expecting, okay, and to the degree that they have been set up by their own biblical prophecies to cause them to receive the Antichrist and the false prophet as well. Did you want to add to that? Okay. The first question regarding Daniel and the 69 weeks and the 7 weeks and so forth, again, a very cryptic passage. Now, I did deal with that to a degree in the first session, a little bit of it. But, you know, essentially what that speaks of is a final 7-year tribulation. Now, what the majority position is throughout the church, in which I agree with, is that the Antichrist at the beginning of that 7 years initiates a false peace treaty with Israel. Okay, that's what we know about the Antichrist, and it speaks about that in Daniel 9. It's right in there, 25 through 27-ish. And then some of the verses that you just read where he destroys through peace. It's interesting that it says he destroys through peace, and when he does invade, he invades lands that are at ease, that are at peace, and so forth. The understanding of the church throughout history, by and large, okay, is that the 7 years begins with the false peace treaty. It says he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 Shabuah. That's a week of years. And then in the middle of that 7 years, he breaks the treaty and sets up the abomination that causes desolation. So essentially what you have is a peace treaty with Israel and the surrounding Islamic nations. Now, a lot of people have said Israel would never do that. Well, the fact of the matter is that they did it with Arafat under Oslo. They've done it all the time. And if there is a people that Israel would, you know, commit a peace treaty with, it has to be the Islamic nations, because they're the ones that are always wanting to invade them. So what I would expect to see is a mediator-like nation that Israel essentially trusts. Now, interestingly enough, Israel still, although it's been a little bit damaged, still has this long-term relationship with Turkey. In fact, Israeli and Turkish troops train together. They're considered allies. Israel still, to this day, trusts Turkey despite its radical turn to Islam. What I expect to see is after maybe some more conflicts and so forth, an Islamic leader to emerge, a great mediator, someone that has the ability to stand as a bridge nation between the East and the West, between Israel and her neighbors, someone who claims to be on both sides, promise peace and security. And also to back that up with a security promise, to say, look, you know, if Iran wants to, you know, do this or that to you, we promise that we will stand against that as a coalition. And then in the middle of the 7 years, he reneges on that. Now, a little bit of history is that Muhammad starts out in Mecca, and he was a member of the Qurayshi tribe. And then they kicked him out. He took his little band of guys, and he went about 200 miles north to Medina. Okay, when he was in Medina, again, a very small band of guys at the time, about 2,000 people, he said, hey, we're going to go to Mecca. We're going to make pilgrimage. And on the way, coming into Mecca, the Qurayshi stopped him, and they abused him in front of his men, and they really shamed him, and they said, you're not going to Mecca. In other words, he prophesied that he was going to Mecca. They said, no, you're not going to Mecca. And then they said, but we're going to make a peace treaty with you. From now on, for 10 years, we are not going to attack you or your men. You don't attack us or our men. However, if one of your men becomes a Qurayshi, leaves Islam, and wants to come back to us, we keep him. But if one of our people becomes a Muslim, you send him back. Okay? So it was a completely lopsided treaty. Muhammad agreed to it. He agreed to it. All his men were upset. They're like, you're the prophet of God. They just shamed you. You know, and he said, no, this was a great victory. This was a great victory. Because then that night, he says that Allah revealed to him that from that time forward, any Muslim that joined the small Muslim group invading villages and so forth would get to keep a significant portion of the booty, the spoil, the slaves, the wealth, you name it. Immediately, he began invading Jewish villages. 1, 2, 3, 7 villages he invaded. He took their wealth. He took their people. Within 2 years, the Muslims went from 2,000 to 10,000. Okay? That treaty was called the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. Okay? 2 years had gone by. It was a 10-year peace treaty. Muhammad went from 2,000 to 10,000. He invaded Mecca. He destroyed the Qurayshis. He broke the treaty. Okay? So this concept of making a treaty within Islam, making treaty with enemy nations in order to gain strength, in order to reload. You know, that there's always that joke. How do you spell treaty in the Middle East? R-E-L-O-A-D. They make a treaty, and we see this today with Gaza. Okay, ceasefire, truce. Okay, Iran, give us some more weapons, you know. As soon as they're ready, treaty's done, treaty's over. And so this concept, that this example that Muhammad left for Islam is carried out today through the Islamic world. And that's what I expect to see, is a false peace treaty. Unfortunately, Israel, by and large, is dominated by left-wing politicians that are willing to trust foolishly those that are not truly their allies. They're willing to entrust and always believe the best in these people, which repeatedly prove never to live up to their promises. And I'm trying to think, did I answer all your questions? Did I start to? What was the last one? Matthew 24. What particular verse? I missed that last bit. In Matthew 24, you said, does 24, 21? For there will be a great tribulation. Yeah, the great tribulation is primarily the last 3.5 years. That occurs after the Antichrist breaks the treaty. That's when he invades the land of Israel. That's when all hell breaks loose. And it's really the great tribulation. People often refer to the 7 years. It's really the last 3.5. Okay? The first 3.5 years is largely false peace. That's why when the Antichrist invades, it says he will conquer through peace. He invades a people at ease. In Ezekiel, it speaks of him invading a land, a people at ease, you know, who feel secure and so forth. And that's a theme that's repeated throughout, many of the prophecies. So did that answer everything? Okay.
This man is a man of God. He's an ex-retired evangelist. And he believes that no one can be saved after the rapture. And I just would like your take on that. Thank you.
Well, I mean, it speaks about, last night Steve looked at the verse that said, I saw the souls of those who were beheaded for their testimony to Jesus. So it's the Antichrist that's doing the beheading. And what was the other verse that he pointed out? It says, yeah, I saw the souls of the martyrs. They did not accept the mark of the beast, but they died for their testimony. So they're here on the earth. They die for their testimony to Jesus. They're believers. And the Antichrist beheads them. So there will clearly be people who will be here on the earth during the reign of the Antichrist who will be believers. So there has to be people that will be saved. Secondly, again, the entire Jewish nation comes to faith after Jesus returns. I mean, that's an entire nation. What was the early part of your question? Oh, just, real briefly, regarding the rapture, what I personally believe is that the church will be here for the seals and the trumpets. Christ comes and we are raptured. The bowls of wrath, I believe, are poured out after Christ returns. I believe there is, loosely a 30-day period whereby Jesus himself is defeating the nations of the earth and executing vengeance. And that is actually the time when the real heavy wrath of God is poured out. And it's actually a very biblically defendable position. That is, in essence, similar to, technically, for those who follow these things, sort of a hybrid between the post-tribulational and the pre-wrath position. I believe that we will be raptured when Christ returns. 2 Thessalonians makes that very clear. But I also believe that we will be here, but will be glorified when the wrath of God is poured out, when his vengeance is executed and so forth, the great earthquake and the hailstones and all those things. We're here for some difficult times, but again, the Bible emphasizes over and over again that it is for a short time, for 1 hour. That reference to the short period is referenced several times. In light of eternity and so forth, in the big picture, it's a very brief time. I know that there are some who listen to this and still say adamantly, I'm pre-trib or whatever, mid-trib. That's completely acceptable. Again, I just want to reiterate, wisdom for all of life. Prepare for the worst, hope for the best. as others say, pray for pre, prepare for post. And I think that that's a wise position. Hey, who doesn't want to be up in heaven while all the difficult stuff's going down? We all do. But it's really not the pattern. It's really not the pattern of God's people throughout biblical history and throughout the history of the church and so forth. God loves us. He's not going to let us go through something that we cannot handle. That's going to be beyond our stretch. And again, we need to take note of the fact that the reign of the Antichrist, the tribulation will fall on the whole earth. But the rule of the Antichrist is, as we've seen, more regional than it is global. And what it's going to look like here may not be the same way that it looks like in Irian Jaya or Papua New Guinea or New Zealand. We don't know. We don't know. We need to prepare for all things, hope for the best, and I don't think that the rapture is really an issue to divide over, unfortunately. It's almost become a strange standard of orthodoxy. People go, are you pre-trib? No. Oh, no wonder. The guy's practically a Jehovah's Witness, for goodness sake. You know what I mean? It's like as if that's some, and it's amazing in light of the fact that the absolute lack of solid biblical evidence for it. It is a huge issue, and I would even go so far as to say that it is almost a demonic stronghold on the church, to the point where if you reject that thing, you are almost an apostate, and it's such a strange doctrine to divide over. You could I don't know if I said this last. You could be like a T.D. Jakes, deny the Trinity, and you'll be well received within the church. You deny the pre-trib rapture, and you're like kicked out. You know what I mean? And it's just strange. Of all the doctrines to really take a stand on the pre-trib, it's odd. But in any case, it's not an issue worth dividing over. There's far more important things to attend to right now.
Hi, Joel.
Okay.
My question relates to Revelation 17 and Revelation 18, the drunken woman who rides the beast, and then Mystery Babylon. Could you please elaborate? Is there a difference between the two chapters? Are they the same woman? And who, in your opinion, if you have any guesses, might Mystery Babylon be?
Yeah. I was going to take a whole session to focus on the harlot. I was going to identify the beast and then identify the harlot. The problem is my Ezekiel 38 ended up becoming so long I needed to take 2 sessions. Very briefly, and I lose a lot of people when I tell them what I think about this, because they go, well, everything you've said so far sounds good, but that just seems a little bit out there. Revelation 17 and 18 are primarily discussing harlot Babylon, as well as Isaiah 17 and Jeremiah 50, okay? Because there in Isaiah 17 and Jeremiah 50, it describes the utter destruction of Babylon. Now, scholars agree that the utter destruction that those passages describe never happened in history. Never. And thus, it's speaking about the ultimate end-time destruction of Mystery Babylon. Now, very briefly, Babylon was the capital of ancient Babylonia. Okay? That was one of the primary beast empires of biblical history. It was the primary, if we look at Revelation 17 and 18, it is describing a religious and an economic system. Okay? A religio-economic system. First and foremost, people always focus either on one on the religious or one on the economic. It is both, and it very much emphasizes both. Ancient Babylon was the primary capital. It was the capital city of ancient Babylonia. Okay? Then, at the end of 2 Peter, I think it's 2 Peter as opposed to 1 Peter, it again mentions Babylon in the New Testament times, and this is very interesting. I'll read this. Let's see. Yeah, I think it's at the end of 1 Peter then. 5:13. Peter was in Babylon. Peter was a bishop he was in Babylon. He was in Rome, okay? Every church father, all historians are in universal agreement that Peter was in Rome when he wrote this, okay? He was a bishop in the early church of Rome. And he says this, writing from Rome, he says, she who is in Babylon, referring to the church that is in Babylon, It was a code word that they used to refer to Rome in case the letter got intercepted. But they referred to Rome in the early 1st century as Babylon. She who is in Babylon, chosen together with you, sends you greetings as doth my son Marcus. Babylon was the capital of the reigning beast empire initially, Babylonia. Later, the reigning beast empire during the early church was what? It was the Roman Empire. Peter, writing from the capital of the Roman Empire, from Rome, calls it Babylon. Now, this is not an extensive pattern, but it is a pattern, and what it tells us is that Babylon, mystery Babylon, spiritual Babylon, is a concept that migrates, okay? It is the capital of whatever is the reigning beast empire of the day. Does that make sense? Today, the reigning beast empire in the earth is the Islamic empire. It is the premier anti-Semitic, anti-Christ spirit in the earth. It is the greatest anti-Christ force the earth has ever seen, ever. The capital, what is the spiritual and the financial capital of the Islamic world today? What city do 1.3 billion Muslims bow toward every day? Mecca. What is the premier financial capital of the Islamic world today? Saudi Arabia, the home of the two holy mosques. Saudi Arabia today lives in such an unbelievable, extravagant measure of wealth, the Saudi government. They fund and spread Islam throughout the earth, the most radical anti-Christ religion force that has ever existed. They are spreading and funding the spread of radical Islam, jihad throughout the earth. We are funding it, okay? I believe that the premier city in the earth today that is contending in the spirit against Jerusalem to reign the earth, to reign over the earth as the spiritual capital of the earth is Mecca/Saudi Arabia. Okay? I know that's kind of a wild concept to introduce, but when you read through Revelation 17 and 18, every last description, I was taken out into where? The desert to behold a woman. She's royalty. She lives in absolute luxury. You know, I had all this great stuff. Maybe I'll do it if I come back next year. You know, Prince Talal bin Walid's Mercedes covered with diamonds, $38 million Mercedes. No, 40, I think it's a 48 million. It's his 38th car. You know, name for me some rap artist, American president, artist, or just real estate mogul who even begins to approach that type of wealth. It doesn't exist in the United States. So there's a handful of other theories about what Mystery Babylon is. The problem is each one of those theories has a handful of things that just don't line up. Like some people go, well, it's New York City or it's, you know, Rome. But there's always a series of things that don't work. It all works with Saudi Arabia. It all works. And who did President Clinton receive like $30 million from? It was just revealed recently. Saudis. Every single solitary American president and politician of influence that retires from government, you name for me one, and I will show you and give you documented evidence that they are on the payroll. They are either on some board or they are a consultant for some Saudi Arabian company, and they are receiving anywhere from a few $100,000 a year to millions of dollars per year from the Saudis. You don't give away $25 million to somebody and not expect something in return. The United States is playing the harlot with the great harlot. We are funding our own demise. We are funding the spread of radical jihad throughout the earth. You name for me a nation in the earth where Sunni radical Islam is a problem, I will show you that Saudi Arabia funded it. Here in the United States, you find a local mosque. I guarantee you that Saudi Arabia funded it. You go in there and look at their literature. It is anti-Semitic, anti-American hate literature with the Saudi Arabian government stamp of approval right on it. I have a host of books years ago that I ordered from the Saudi consulate. I sent an email, send me some free stuff. The Saudi consulate sent me a nice big leather Quran, a bunch of anti-Christian books. Can you imagine if the United States, just anybody in the world, send us an email, we'll send you a Bible and some reasons why Christianity is the truth, you know? And then, you know, I could just go on forever. Saudi Prince Talal comes over, he gives $20 million to Harvard University and Georgetown, and for what? The establishment of Islamic studies programs. And then he comes over, and what's he do? He lectures us about how we need to be more tolerant toward Islam. Coming from Saudi Arabia, one of the most intolerant nations, one of the most blatantly human rights violating nations in the world, and he preaches to the United States that we need to be more tolerant. It's Orwellian. I mean, it's just alternate universe stuff. But the deeper that you look into it, the more you go, yeah, this is the nation that the kings of the earth are committing adultery with. And it makes complete sense. It's a strange concept to introduce initially, but it does make complete sense when all things are considered. Again, it requires that one ascribe to the Islamic paradigm initially, to acknowledge the fact that the Islamic empire is the reigning beast empire of the earth today. I mean, there's nothing else that can really compare other than an imaginary Roman Empire that's going to suddenly, rise up, and a new religion that's going to emerge overnight and all that. But for right now, it makes absolute sense.
You didn't mention this in your lecture today, but many people believe that the mark of the beast will be a physical mark, and I was wondering what your opinion on that was.
For me, it's still a mystery. In our book, God's War on Terror, we discuss that quite a bit. I have to say that I don't fully ascribe, it's difficult when you co-author a book, and I think Waleed would even agree with me in God's War on Terror. I don't fully ascribe to that which is set forth in the book. It has a few problems. What the mark of the beast will be is still a mystery to me. What I do know is this, is that in 1 John 2:22, John tells us what the theology of the Antichrist is. So we've discussed today the region that the Antichrist would come from. John tells us about the theology of the Antichrist, and I discussed that quite a bit last time I was here. But it says that he denies the Father and the Son, right? He denies the Father and the Son. The creed of Islam is what? There is no God other than Allah. Muhammad is the prophet, the final messenger of Allah. It tries to replace Yahweh with Allah. It tries to replace Jesus with Muhammad. I believe that is the quintessential Antichrist creed in the earth. We need to remember that the mark of the beast, there's this really goofy concept that we've held to, where, that the mark of the beast, if you take it, you go to hell. Okay, I was down in Florida several years ago visiting my aunt and her alcoholic husband. We were out feeding his dogs, and he was drunk in the middle of the afternoon. And I noticed a track up on his dashboard of his truck, and I said something to him, and he said, "Yeah, I tell you what, man, I'm not going to take that mark of the beast." And I thought, man, that was just so classic, because there's this mentality that says I can live in a way that denies Christ with my life, but I'm just not going to take that mark, because I know the people that take the mark go to hell. The mark of the beast has to, whatever we believe regarding the mark of the beast, it has to flow with the standard soteriology of the rest of the Bible, the method by which we are saved. We are saved based on whether we accept or reject Jesus. The mark of the beast will, by necessity, infer a acceptance or rejection of Jesus. There will be a creedal element to that thing. It's not just, oh, whoops, you got me. You stuck the chip in me, now I'm going to hell. It's not some weird backdoor method by which Satan can get us into hell, even if we're saved. Do you know what I'm saying? It infers a denial or an acceptance of Christ.
Then where it says that no one can buy or sell, how would that play out if it's symbolic in nature?
Well, it's interesting to note that with the global economic meltdown, we're seeing the emergence again of a call throughout the Islamic world for the establishment of Sharia finance and Sharia law and so forth, and we're seeing the globalization of the world. It's hard to say, but even under Sharia law, if you are a dhimmi, sort of a subjected person, you're subject to certain restrictions and so forth. And, it's interesting, I'll just make mention of this, that the Nazi practice of putting badges on Jews comes from Islamic history. It was the Muslims and the various Muslim empires that did that first. They would put a mark on the subjected peoples. They would make them wear unusual clothing, but they would always identify the non-Muslims. And we talk about that quite a bit in God's War on Terror. So it's interesting that there is that practice within Islam of marking the opposite, marking the non-Muslims. I'll also point this out. This is very interesting, and I don't discuss this in Antichrist. But within Islamic eschatology, which is basically a rewriting of distorted version of biblical and Gnostic and Jewish traditions and so forth. But Muslims have a tradition which says that at the end of the age, a literal beast will emerge from out of the earth. Okay, Revelation 13, I saw a beast come out of the earth. It's symbolic, it's an empire. Well, the Muslims read that, and somehow it made its way into their traditions that at the end of the age, a real beast would emerge out of the earth. Now get this. The Bible says that an empire will emerge out of the earth, okay? And I'm claiming it will be an Islamic empire. Muslims claim a beast will emerge out of the earth from Mecca. And here's the thing. They say that the beast will mark the foreheads of all true Muslims. And so if you're a Muslim who pays attention to these things, as Walid says in his book, he says, I grew up praying that I would be found worthy to receive the mark of the beast. Everything in Islamic eschatology is Christian eschatology flipped upside down. So it's just an interesting, there's not going to be some literal beast, but it's just interesting, again, that there are those anti-parallels found throughout Islamic eschatology. What the mark of the beast will be, I don't know. I do not know. My guess is it will somehow be associated with Islamic Sharia law, the global economic meltdown. There's going to be some changes ahead. I have no idea what it's going to look like.
I'd like to know if you believe if the Antichrist has been born, and also the research you have done, do you have an inclination of who you think the Antichrist might be if he's here?
I tend to believe that he is alive and on the earth, yeah. I do. There's a handful of reasons. I don't believe the Lord is going to let it get much farther than it is. 100 years from now, Europe will be completely, 100% Islamic. There's so many other things. There's so many trends, the merging of multiple trends. I believe that the end is near. We've seen, these nations coming together. I don't think it's far off. It's happening rapidly. Now, there's been many before me that believed that as well, and they were wrong. So again, we need to have a humble approach. I tend to believe the Antichrist is alive and on the earth. I don't have any, theories. I am watching, the Turkish leadership and paying attention to anything that comes out of Turkey, but I wouldn't, stand up here and say, I think it's this guy or that guy. I don't think that's wise until we see a very specific, comprehensive peace treaty. I don't think we should even begin to speculate. I don't think it's helpful. You know what's interesting, though? I'll point this out. The primary position held by the Roman Empire theorists is that the Antichrist would come out of Europe. Okay? Now remember, the Roman Empire included much of the Middle East, as well as Europe and Northern Africa, right? Now, there has been numerous suggestions as to who the Antichrist is. So today, there are some fairly prominent prophecy guys that say the Antichrist is Javier Solana. He's one of the big leaders in the NATO and EU. Some people have said that Prince Charles is the Antichrist. In the books, it's the Left Behind series, it's Nikolai Carpathia. Now, here's the interesting thing, is that the word there, the people of the prince to come, does mean the ethnic. So Dr. Reagan points out that the Antichrist would probably be Italian in origin. Well, if you're sticking by the verse, and it is in fact, Roman and Italian, then that would make sense. But here's what's interesting, is that you can suggest, and this speaks to the false equation, that people see Roman and they go equals Europe. Because if someone comes forward and suggests, for instance, that the Antichrist would be Romanian, okay, as Tim LaHaye has, or that he would be British, or that he would be Javier Solana's Spanish, that's okay, that's acceptable. But if you say that he would come from the Middle East, suddenly all these guys are going, no, that's unbiblical. Wait a minute. If he's coming from Turkey, he's still coming from the Roman Empire, just like Romania or Britain. Why is it that as soon as you go to the Middle East, suddenly everybody goes crazy? It doesn't make any sense at all. But there is a, as I said, there is a eschatological revolution taking place right now. Chuck Missler has come over to the Islamic end-time paradigm. He fully embraces it. He's fully on board. Chuck Missler's, a close associate of Hal Lindsey. He's been around for a long time. There are a lot of prophecy teachers and students that are embracing this thing. They're recognizing the fact that it's thoroughly biblical. However, there are many that are really upset by it, and again, it's something that people have written about and taught for many years. And like I just said, there's stuff that I've already changed small details in some of my books, by the grace of God, depending on how long it takes for Christ to return, that I'll never fall into that position that Steve was talking about, which is defending my position, but rather seeking truth. And so there's a lot that are upset, but the bottom line is, even if you embrace the Roman paradigm, that still leaves room for Middle Eastern Antichrist. Okay, if we're hold to the fact that it's just within the greater Roman Empire, it still leaves room for Middle Eastern Antichrist. So, anyway.
Joel, I want to thank you for coming here, and I just thank you for working that you're doing to spread the word. And I just want to ask you, why are we being told so much that Islam is a peaceful religion? And all we have to do is just read what they want to do, and I see no peace nowhere. So why does our government and that continue to let us know that it's a peaceful religion?
Yeah. The spirit of the age, the politically correct spirit of the age. What we've done in the West is we've taken principles that our country were founded on: freedom, openness, and tolerance, and so forth, a value for human life and human rights. And of all of those, we've pulled out one principle, and that's tolerance, and we've made it a national idol. And it says that everything else must be subject to that principle of tolerance. And so, unfortunately, even if something is essentially parasitic and cancerous and destructive to us, it's okay. We need to tolerate it, even if it is at the expense of freedom, human rights, and so forth. So the principles of openness and tolerance, these are wonderful principles that have made us a great people, right? We're an immigrant nation. However, it has its limits. It has its limits. There's that famous quote that I've referenced a handful of times, where there was this gathering of interfaith dialogue, some leaders from the Catholic Church. I think they were in Turkey, and they were having this interfaith dialogue, and one of the Muslim leaders stood up, and he said, "I'm sick of this. This is nonsense." He said, "Listen, thanks to your democratic laws, we will invade you. Thanks to our religious laws, we will dominate you." Until the West wakes up and recognizes the fact that Islam, that the very basis of what it is, stands in contrast to everything that we stand for in terms of human rights, a value for human life, and so forth, we will lose. We are welcoming in the cancer. Okay? You don't welcome that in. I'm not saying that we shouldn't welcome Muslims, but we need to be very open about the fact that Islam is destructive to our way of life. Islam is the enemy, not Muslims. Islam is destructive. And it puts us in a difficult position because we have to continually be open and so forth. We have to be an open society. That's what makes us who we are. But we have to be wise about it. Whenever Islam is a 1 or 2% population in a given nation, it's always portrayed as the wonderful, peaceful religion, okay? But you go to the Middle East and there's no such thing. It doesn't exist. You get to maybe more a nation like France, where it's rather than 1 or 2%, you have 5, 8%. You start seeing the push, where the minority begins to tyrannize the majority. We want you to begin to subject yourselves to our religious laws. You get up to the 10%, you end up having the formation of jihad militias and so forth. You keep going. Any one of these percentages, apply it to any nation. Look out at any of the nations of the earth, and in direct proportion to the percentage of Muslims in that nation, you will see this pattern. You get 20, 30%, it's almost inevitable that you'll have civil war. And then eventually you have the imposition of the Muslims over the rest of the population, and the majority of the non-Muslim inhabitants will be oppressed. And when you have those nations which most stringently enforce Islamic Sharia law, Saudi Arabia, the Taliban under Afghanistan, and so forth. They are always the most vehement, human rights violating, freedom-less nations in the earth. It's an observable pattern. It's clear. We cannot buy this notion that Islam is peace. That is a Christianized Islam. It's decaffeinated Islam. It's not the real Islam. But you only see it here in the West. You don't see it in Saudi Arabia. There's no such thing as some moderate, peaceful Islam. Once you get there, it's Islam. There is no such, as Erdogan, the Prime Minister of Turkey, said. He got all upset. There is no such thing as moderate Islam. There's just Islam. So it's a big game.
Thank you for coming here today and exposing yourself to even further difficulties. I have a question for you. My wife and I have been to Israel, and we have seen the manufacturing of the appliances and appendages of the stuff that goes inside a temple. And the Israelites seem to be prepared for a brand new temple right now with all the garb and gold and other fabrications. Since the 7-year period of happiness would include offerings, and offerings require a temple, and if we were coming close to the time when the Antichrist would be here, it would seem to me we are coming close to constructing the temple itself, with the thought that the temple doesn't have to be right where the dome of the golden dome of the rock is, and can just be 37.5 feet to the east or whatever has been recently chosen. Do you have any feedback from your research and from your contacts in the Middle East that the temple is about to become a reality in the next decade or two?
First of all, I do believe that there will be a temple. I believe there's some that don't, some that think that those passages are speaking spiritually, allegorically. I think that it says the Antichrist will set himself up in the temple of God. I personally believe that there will be a temple. There are those that don't, and again, that's fine. I just simply think that the overwhelming biblical evidence is that there will be. There's the Temple Institute in Jerusalem, and it actually is a fairly small minority. But there are those that do, in fact, want to rebuild the temple among the Orthodox Jews, and they are preparing to do so, and they're doing all the things necessary, and it's very interesting to watch. I personally believe that probably the peace treaty will involve concessions for Israel to share not only Jerusalem, not only will we see a divided Jerusalem shared, but we will also see a shared Mount Moriah, a shared Temple Mount. So I think that probably we will. We'll see a temple built next to the Dome of the Rock, and everyone will cheer this wonderful example of diversity, and the Antichrist will stand in the temple of God in the last days. And that's, another sign that things are moving in that direction. Of course, 16 years ago, I remember reading an article about that they were moving in that direction. So sometimes things take longer than we think, but within the next few decades, I don't think that's unfeasible at all, But again, time will tell.
If you were a Messianic Jew who was a citizen of Israel, who would you vote for?
I'd vote for Netanyahu in a second. Yeah. And then I'd yell Yahoo. The problem with the Israeli left is the same problem that we're seeing here with our leadership, is that there's just a mindless adherence to principles that don't work, that are observably don't work. On the other hand, I will make mention that recently at the World Economic Forum, I saw one of the best speeches I have ever seen by Shimon Peres, who was a fairly leftist leader, speaking about the accusations of the world regarding Israel and her behavior during the recent Gaza war. And then, of course, Erdogan, the Turkish prime minister, had a big outburst and stood up. I'm not sure if any of you read about that in the news, and burst out of there and said, "I'm never coming back to this." This was sitting on the stage with Shimon Peres, Prime Minister Erdogan, Ban Ki-moon, the head of the UN General Secretary, and there was some other Arab spokesperson. And man, they just hammered Israel, And then Shimon Peres got up and just defended Israel, and it was fantastic. It was a historical speech. I try to find it on YouTube. But he said, we, this loud, thundering Israeli voice, we are bringing in Israel's bringing in water to Gaza, and then he says, the only thing that we're not allowing in is Iranian bombs, and he was mad, and everyone started cheering, and then Erdogan gets up and just laid out one of the most ridiculous outbursts that you've ever seen. You people like to kill children. I have seen you kill. And, Shimon Peres says, if Istanbul was being bombed every day, you would do the same thing, and they had this big outburst. So anyway, all that to say, that was exciting for a end-time geek like myself, but the Israeli left, by and large, seems to take the wrong turns at every move. Netanyahu is the only one that I've ever seen that understands the reality of the Middle East. On the other hand, he can be, a pretty serious dude. So, it's scary to see what's going to take place in the next few years. It looks like Netanyahu's a shoo-in, but I don't know that that's going to happen or not. So, amen. All right. Thank you guys so much. Thanks again.